Good afternoon, Excellencies, delegates, friends and colleagues. So nice to see so many familiar and friendly friends on this call. UNDRR is pleased to have the opportunity to consult with participants at this critical inflection point in the implementation of the Sendai framework and other fundamental agreements, conventions, frameworks, not least the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement. This particular agenda item serves as an introductory exchange with you on the midterm review of the Sendai framework, the concept note and guidance for which were shared by note verbals with all permanent missions in New York and Geneva at the end of last year, as well as with stakeholders. Both were developed drawing on experiences of previous and ongoing midterm reviews and stock-taking exercises across multiple agenda, including that of the Hyogo Framework for Action, the invitation of the Third UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Sendai, and the calls of the Sendai framework itself in the 2019 Global Platform. And importantly, the decision of member states in the UN General Assembly in 2020, and indeed the resolution adopted in last month to hold a midterm review of the implementation of the Sendai framework, the initiation of which the UN Secretary General recommended should come immediately, and so that we would conclude at a high-level meeting in May of 2023. Next slide, please. As you will have seen in the concept note and in the guidance documents, the midterm review of the Sendai framework is both a retrospective and a prospective review that will, to the degree possible, be aligned with, contribute to, and receive inputs from other global stock-taking and review exercises running concurrently, including those of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention to Combat Desertification, the New Urban Agenda, and many others. In taking stock of implementation of the Sendai framework, the midterm review will assess progress made and challenges experienced in preventing and reducing disaster risk, recognizing that the operating environment in which the Sendai framework and other agreements, conventions and frameworks are being implemented at global, regional, national and local levels has altered immeasurably since many were adopted in 2015, not least with the COVID-19 pandemic and accelerating global heating, including through anthropogenic climate change. Both the latter demonstrate the systemic nature of risk and demand urgent and fundamental reflections on how the world seeks to collaborate, understand, and manage risk in the 21st century, now to 2030 and beyond. Next slide, please. The implications that this has for many of the systems upon which societies depend, food, energy, water, for example, are profound, requiring deep and challenging transformations and transitions if we are to be able to determine and navigate pathways forward that sustain, not degrade, healthy and regenerative ecosystems. Pathways in which the systemic nature of risk is better understood, is factored into how we live, the choices we make in social, political, economic, technological, and ecological systems, and is thus ultimately more effectively managed. The importance of the midterm review coming at this time, therefore, cannot be overstated. In terms of its recommendations for policy and new approaches to implementation, including means of implementation, for the second half of the period of the Sendai framework, but also in respect of integrating risk reduction into the implementation of other international agendas and sectors and behaviors and areas of work, so as to limit the unsustainable augmentation of vulnerability and exposure to hazards, and to realize the outcome and goal of the Sendai framework. This may imagine transformations in international and domestic risk governance and management mechanisms and approaches that ultimately support the pursuit of risk-informed, sustainable and regenerative development in this decade of action, and of course, that are fit for purpose for 21st century existential challenges. Next slide, please. Using the structure of the Sendai framework as the basis of the review, the midterm review will be consistent with the principles of the Sendai framework in engaging and benefiting from governments and non-state stakeholders through consultation and review. informed by strategic and probing questions, reference to which are made in both the concept note and indeed the guidance documents that have been circulated recently. To see a review that will, to the degree possible, be aligned with, contribute to, and receive inputs from other global stocktaking and review exercises running concurrently, including those of the 2030 Agenda, the Paris Stocktake, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the midterm review of the International Water Decade, and others. You will see that in the documents circulated by the Secretariat that there are numerous ways in which states and non-state actors can engage within the review, and the UNDRR stands ready to assist any in which who would like to engage. This, of course, does have a focus on consultation, exchange, review, and reporting back into the review process. But there will be many other forms and opportunities to be able to contribute, including through events at the global platform, including on the midterm review plenaries, but equally in the context of online dialogues and debates, thematic commission studies, and many other. Next slide, please. I'll share with you very briefly some elements of the recent guidance for member states that was circulated in December and that are also elucidated in the guidance for stakeholders. As you will have heard, the review itself seeks to foment an environment in which we can undertake in a multi-stakeholder fashion, consistent with the guiding principles of the Sendai framework, a deeper reflection on progress made and challenges, context shifts and emerging issues, to identify recommendations for renovated, amplified and accelerated action in the period to 2030 that we believe could inspire further policy adjustments and new modalities for implementation in this period. This will also conclude, we hope, in the deliberations of member states for a renewed commitment that will be discussed in New York in Q1 and Q2 of 2023, that will be discussed at a high-level meeting of the UN General Assembly on the 18th and 19th of May, that should conclude and culminate in a political declaration on the midterm review of the Sendai framework. The guidance that was circulated to all member states on the 28th of December seeks to encourage states to engage in, as the guiding principles identify, in an all of state institutions and all of society undertaking that looks to generate learning and recommendations that are grounded in country level and subnational level experience, to assist the identification of risk-informed and prevention-oriented policy decisions and implementation modalities. One of the subtexts of the midterm review is equally to initiate nascent thinking on possible international arrangements for risk-informed and sustainable regenerative development beyond 2030. And in this vein, we are seeking to make sure that we can promote to the degree possible the interrelationship between this midterm review and those of other agendas and frameworks, not least of the 2030 Agenda. Next slide, please. The intention is for this to be a thorough review, but we are certainly looking to reduce any burden on states and non-state actors in undertaking the exercise. And thus, existing platforms and processes where these exist will, of course, be capitalized upon within the disaster risk reduction community and beyond. But they, of course, should be specific to context. And thus, in terms of the national consultations, review and reporting exercises that states and stakeholders, we hope, will participate in fully, this will need to reflect both circumstances, capacity, needs, and priorities, but equally to be able to bring forth the shifts in context and emerging issues that have been identified since the adoption of the framework in 2015. As mentioned, this will, of course, utilize the inputs and deliberations of many of the recently concluded regional platforms around the world, and indeed, of course, the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction that takes place later this year, and, of course, the global platform. But equally, we will be looking to try and to capitalize on multiple other events, many conferences of the parties of different conventions, the regional forums for sustainable development, and others. And of course, we are encouraging, as consistent with the guiding principles, for this to be a multi-stakeholder undertaking. Next slide, please. In terms of timelines, there is a more detailed highlighting of specific milestones. But in terms of state interaction, we have encouraged states to take a structured approach to designing and undertaking the rollout of the national consultations and review exercises, including the identification of roadmap and timelines, identifying focal points and coordinating mechanisms, and then identifying the types of consultations and review modalities to be employed, which could be online in many instances as COVID restrictions continue to play out in many country contexts, but ideally in person if that is to be possible. And these could be preceded or supplemented by online surveys, thematic or sectoral or focus group discussions, and other literature support. This will, of course, be enriched if we can draw upon existing reviews, reports, data, and information and platforms. And indeed, as we have, as member states themselves identified in the Sendai framework, we are only going to make an effective impact on the reduction of risk if indeed an all-of-society approach is undertaken in addition to an all-of-state institution undertaking. Next slide. The Secretariat, in consultation with states and other partners, has developed a series of core questions which are oriented around the structure of the Sendai framework, the outcome and goal, the context, its priorities, aspects of collaboration, partnership, and cooperation. A literature review will shortly be circulated to be able to support a foundational reflection prior to initiating consultations and review. And indeed, a number of countries will be supported in the 5 regions of the UNDRR regional offices to be able to support government-led consultations and review. And this, we expect, will be extended to the UN system, into the UN Sustainable Development Group, where we will see collaboration amongst different partners in supporting the reflections of states and non-state actors. Next slide, please. The possible inputs to the midterm review, both at the country level, but equally at subnational or regional and global levels, are manifest. And these are just some of those that will be obviously a major source of inspiration for how we will be able to reflect on progress made in current context, and indeed, as we start to look forward to 2030 and beyond, how we can inform potential renovations of how we understand and manage risk, how we design governance architecture to be able to more effectively create the enabling environment for risk-informed preventative decision-making, and indeed how investments and aspects of the disaster risk reduction approaches, including around Build Back Better and recovery efforts, can be made more pertinent and more effective and impactful in the remaining period of the Sendai framework. Next slide, please. In terms of timelines, I mentioned previously that the midterm review will culminate in 2023 at a high-level meeting of the General Assembly on the 18th and 19th of May. And indeed, the entire review process is designed to be able to build a body of knowledge and indeed culminate in reflections of member states on recommendations for accelerated, amplified, and renovated action thereafter. And indeed, the national consultations and stakeholder consultations will be beginning immediately in Q1 of this year, running through Q2 and Q3, with recommendations for consultations and review to conclude by August of this year, so that the voluntary national reports of the midterm review of the Sendai framework that were recommended by the UN Secretary General for member states to undertake can be concluded and submitted to the Secretariat by the 30th of September. The reason for this, so that we can then aggregate, compile, synthesize, and develop the report of the midterm review of the Sendai framework, which will be published in March, with preliminary findings being made available in Q1 of 2023 to inform member state negotiations and deliberations in the first quarter of 2023 prior to the high-level meeting. Next slide, please. And so just a brief encapsulation of some of the events that we would expect at the very least to be able to have elements of risk perspectives woven into them, both in the context of dedicated DRR events, of course, the global and regional platforms, as mentioned, many of which were undertaken in Q4 of 2021. But of course, this particular exercise being a pivotal element of those inputs, but equally the global platform and indeed the World Reconstruction Conference this coming May, and of course the Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference in September. But of course, we would be seeking and inviting states and non-state actors and all partners with a role in understanding and better managing risk moving forward to assist us in injecting a risk-based discourse into many other of the ongoing events and processes within which we would encourage a greater reflection on understanding and managing risk. And these are just some of the examples of opportunities that present themselves in 2022 and 2023. By no means exhaustive. There are, of course, much more information contained in the concept note and the guidance documents, but of course, the Secretariat remains at your disposal if you should require additional information. And I thank you.